and I want to explain the background to the efforts that we made to help the Northern Ireland economy through NAMA's sale of the Northern Ireland portfolio. And regardless of those other matters that have subsequently clouded the picture, that demonstrate how the sale was in the best interests of Northern Ireland. Before I turn to my substantive evidence, I think it's important that I deal with three preliminary matters. Firstly, the ongoing NCA investigation. You'll be aware that back in July, I supported a full police investigation into any issues or concerns around the sale of the NAMA portfolio. I welcome the NCA investigation, and I'm eager that nothing that I say or do at this committee will in any way jeopardise or encroach upon their work. I'm happy to cooperate fully with the NCA, and I've already indicated my willingness to speak to them if they feel that I can assist with their inquiries. Secondly, the issue of memory. The events that the committee are considering date back over many years and concern proceedings that were not for the most part controversial at the time. In preparing for this hearing, I've done my best to recollect events, though much of it is quite a distant memory. I've also taken the opportunity to consult contemporaneous records to assist my recollection on those matters. My evidence should be regarded in this context. I offer this explanation not chiefly as a defence against questions that the committee may have to ask me, but as a possible explanation for the frailty of memory from which others may have suffered. Thirdly, the nature of the office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister. It's clear from some of the evidence to this committee, from some of the questions posed by members, and by some of the analysis in the media, that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal relationship between the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister. Uniquely in the Northern Ireland Executive, OFM, DFM has two ministers. The department operates on the basis that certain decisions are taken jointly. That means where the department is carrying out its statutory functions, the agreement of the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister is required. Notably, it doesn't mean that in carrying out a whole range of other duties, that each of us requires the consent of the other. In this regard, it would be common for people or groups to ask to see the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister, but not necessarily both. It would also be common for ministers who I have appointed to ask to meet me or to ask me to meet others in relation to the exercise of their departmental functions. No doubt Sinn Féin ministers similarly consult with the Deputy First Minister. Lest there be any doubt about this matter, a number of years ago, legal advice was sought and received from the Attorney General. Both the Deputy First Minister and I are aware of the terms of this advice. In essence, the Attorney advised that there was no legal impediment to either the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister holding meetings or attending events on their own in their ministerial capacity. That was, of course, subject to the limitation that such meetings would not undermine the performance of a joint statutory duty. Clearly, in this matter, OFM DFM had no statutory duty. I make this point merely to highlight the fact that there would be nothing unusual and certainly nothing improper in either Martin or me meeting people without the knowledge or agreement of the other, though for the most part, in relation to this issue, that was not in fact the case. That brings me to the substantive issue that prompted the committee to invite me here today. The issue of what I and the Deputy First Minister did or did not know about the sale of NAMA's Northern Ireland portfolio. The Deputy First Minister was called to give evidence before the committee following an apparent discrepancy between his public statements and those of the Finance Minister, my colleague Simon Hamilton. Before I turn to the detail of this, I want to stress that in giving my evidence, I don't want to give the impression that the Deputy First Minister deliberately lied to this committee, but I do feel it's my duty now the issue has been raised to set out the factual position as best that I can. To put it at its lowest, I am surprised that given the common approach that had been about all things NAMA, to find that there is now an attempt to demonstrate differences in approach as to how the portfolio was handled. From the creation of NAMA, through the sale of its Northern Ireland portfolio, and until recently, ministers spoke with one voice on every element of this process. At the Executive, during North-South Ministerial Council meetings, and in contributions to the Assembly, there was a united approach to these matters. 1. We both expressed fears about a potential fire sale of assets. 2. We both welcomed the appointment of local representatives to the Northern Ireland Advisory Committee. 3. We both pressed for a dedicated Northern Ireland representative on the NAMA board. 4. I agreed when, several years after its formation, the Deputy First Minister publicly expressed concerns about the impact of NAMA on our local businesses. 5. Not one politician opposed the Deputy First Minister when he became the first politician to publicly call on NAMA to embrace interest from financial institutions wanting to buy NAMA's Northern Ireland assets. And 6. We both welcomed the Cerberus purchase of NAMA's Northern Ireland portfolio. There is documentary evidence of all of this. Unquestionably, my colleagues and I are more active and involved in financial, economic and investment matters because of the departments where our ministers have responsibility. But put simply, it is my contention that we were all in sync on the handling of these matters, and the Deputy First Minister was kept informed of developments in relation to the sale of NAMA's Northern Ireland portfolio throughout the process. I want to touch on 4 occasions referred to in his evidence where my recollections differ from Martin's. The first occasion relates to the meeting with Minister Noonan on the 27th of September. During the course of his evidence to the committee, the Deputy First Minister stated, and I quote, "On the 27th of September 2013, there was a meeting between the First Minister, the Minister of Finance and Personnel, Simon Hamilton, and Minister Noonan at Stormont. I was not aware of that," unquote. This is not correct. In advance of that meeting, I had briefed the Deputy First Minister on the issues that were going to be raised at the meeting. I had invited him to it. In the event he was unable to attend the meeting due to the fact that he had to attend a funeral, but it was agreed that he would be briefed after the meeting. I have a copy of a text message between my special advisor and his that confirms my contention. I can make it available to the committee. The second occasion on which I differ from the account of the Deputy First Minister is the 19th of December 2013. It was events on that date that gave rise to the conflict of evidence between the Finance Minister Simon Hamilton and the Deputy First Minister. This arose out of the release by NAMA of a minute of a conversation between Simon and Frank Daly in December 2013, in which Simon was reported to have said that the Deputy First Minister was aware of interest in the portfolio, and subsequently in January 2014 he reportedly assured Mr Daly that the First and Deputy First Ministers were fully engaged with the bid. The Deputy First Minister in September disputed that statement according to the BBC. At this committee, during questioning by Mr Jim Wells, he denied that he had ever discussed the MOU or that he ever saw it. My clear recollection is that Martin was briefed. Indeed, it is clear from an email sent to his office that the MOU was being sent following a discussion of the matter on the 19th of December. This conversation was with the Deputy First Minister and myself, though we both had special advisers in attendance. It was after this discussion about the MOU that a copy was sent to the Deputy First Minister. This evidence completely vindicates the position of Simon Hamilton, as the email containing the proposed PIMCO MOU sent by my private secretary said, and I quote, "NAMA doc as discussed," unquote. I have the email confirming this position and I can make it available to the committee. Moreover, after the Christmas and New Year break, a further copy of the MOU was sent to another of the Deputy First Minister's special advisers, Mr Vincent Parker, on the 8th of January. I have the email confirming this position. I can make it available to the committee. The third occasion on which I differ with the account of the Deputy First Minister relates to the conference call on the 14th of January. While it is correct to say that the Deputy First Minister in his evidence to the committee accepted that he was on the call, he adamantly denied that the MOU was discussed. However, after he gave evidence to this committee, the Department of Finance in the Republic released a minute of this conference call that confirms the MOU was discussed. It shows Mr McGuinness was aware of the fact that PIMCO had made commitments about how they would deal with assets, and it was our desire to ensure that any other purchaser would do the same. For the record, the Irish Department of Finance minute of the conference call is, in my view, an accurate précis of the conversation. It was agreed during this conference call that the MOU should be forwarded to NAMA This again is consistent with the actions of my private secretary in forwarding the MOU to NAMA by email. This email is also in my possession, along with the ROI Finance Department's minute. I can make them available to the committee, though I suspect they already have them. The fourth occasion on which there is evidence that Martin was being kept in the loop was in relation to the meeting with Cerberus on the 10th of April. During the course of his evidence, the Deputy First Minister indicated that he was unaware of a meeting with Cerberus held on the 10th of April 2014. However, the Deputy First Minister was invited to this meeting and was fully aware of it. The meeting took place during the week of the Irish President's state visit to the UK. Martin and I had attended the banquet for the Irish President at Windsor Castle on the Tuesday night. He remained in London for another day after I travelled home. He was due to return to Northern Ireland for a jobs announcement on the Thursday morning, which was the same day as the meeting with Cerberus. I have 2 text messages between special advisers confirming he was invited and aware of the meeting. Indeed, he had hoped to attend, albeit that he would arrive late. I have a copy of the text messages that confirm my contention. I can make them available to the committee. Therefore, whatever way one looks at it, it is clear that the Deputy First Minister did have knowledge of the material facts that were available to me during the process. He was invited to the meeting with Michael Noonan in September, and he testified in his own evidence, being briefed after it. He was provided with the PIMCO MOU in December and again in January. He was party to a conference call where all of the issues were fully ventilated, and he was invited to the Cerberus meeting in April. Reference was made to the PIMCO meeting in May of 2013. It was one of a significant number of meetings that I have attended over the years relating to matters where one of my ministers has lead responsibility. And I, as First Minister, would either welcome or encourage investor interest. The Deputy First Minister is often engaged when such contacts become hopeful propositions. This is particularly true with DETI contacts. Whilst more than 2.5 years on, I have very little detailed memory of this meeting, which Sammy Wilson also attended. I do, however, remember being impressed by the company, who expressed an interest in working in a manner that would have been beneficial to the Northern Ireland interest. The first Cerberus meeting at which Dan Quayle was present was also an introductory meeting. The meeting comprised a presentation by Cerberus of the company's business reach and practice, which I received a hard copy of. This was followed by a rather longer and perhaps more interesting discussion about the political scene in the United States. I need hardly add that both PIMCO and Cerberus acted in an entirely proper and professional manner in all their contacts with us. Turning to the broader issues in relation to the sale of the NAMA portfolio, I would like to address a number of important matters. My involvement in the whole process was sporadic over the period, with the Minister of Finance being involved on a more routine basis given the responsibilities of that department. I'll take care not to trespass on the areas that are at the heart of the NCA investigation, but I think that it's important that I set the record straight on the background to this deal. Firstly, the broader context. It's important to understand that by 2013, the sale by NAMA of the Northern Ireland portfolio was in the economic interests of the province. I have no hesitation in saying that the sale, which would result in a structured disposal of the portfolio, was good for Northern Ireland. I welcomed the deal between NAMA and Cerberus in a press statement, while the Deputy First Minister welcomed it on behalf of Executive Ministers in the Assembly. The picture back in 2009 was somewhat different. As you will be aware, when NAMA was set up, there was considerable concern about the impact it would have on our economy. In particular, there was a worry that the Northern Ireland assets would be sold off in a fire sale, resulting in an already depressed property market in the province being undermined. In the end, because of the good relationship that was built up with the authorities in the Republic and NAMA's handling of the portfolio, this fear proved unfounded. However, as the years passed, while it was clear that the concerns about a fire sale were not being realised, huge property portfolios in Northern Ireland were tied up and remained undeveloped. Ministers were concerned after years of an economic recession caused by the global banking crisis that while land and property prices in other parts of these islands were beginning to rise, the Northern Ireland market was showing no sign of recovery. We knew banks were sitting on development sites, as were the PMS, their administrators, as well as NAMA. We also knew that we had been able to go to market with much of our own surplus government assets. Confidence simply did not exist in the property market, and many of those who in the past had been our key local developers had been badly stung. Many were in debt to the banks and other institutions. Some were already out of business. During the spring of 2013, NAMA announced it would fund development of 2 Northern Ireland sites. We all welcomed that, but recognised that NAMA didn't have the resources to do this for the rest of the portfolio. At the same time, NAMA put a Portrush hotel into administration, and concerns existed that this scenario would become more common. What was required was a structured disposal followed by investment to get the market moving. I believe that it was around May of 2013, with this backdrop, that I was asked, along with Sammy Wilson, to meet with a company that was interested in purchasing the NAMA Northern Ireland portfolio. I cannot be sure, but the first meeting may have been set up at the request of either Frank Cushnan or Ian Coulter, or both. From any previous engagement with Ian and Frank, I had always found them to be motivated by the best interests of Northern Ireland. I knew Ian through his work for the CBI, where his peers respected him so highly that they elevated him to the Northern Ireland chairmanship. Both the Deputy First Minister and I would have been particularly aware of his involvement in the campaign to get a lower local rate of corporation tax. But we both also met him in relation to economic matters in his CBI capacity. Frank I have known since he was the chairman of the Belfast Harbour Commissioners, and again, when as Finance Minister, I was creating the Performance and Efficiency Delivery Unit. In more recent times, he provided assistance for both the Presbyterian Mutual Society and Glentoran when both those organisations faced crises. He was also a member of the Cross-Sector Advisory Group, which Martin and I chaired. In addition, during direct rule, he was appointed as the independent board member of OFM-DFM. However, in relation to the Northern Ireland portfolio, they both made the case that development was being hindered by the legal constraints on NAMA, and that the local interests would be better served if the portfolio was sold on to some other organisation that was able to take a more proactive approach to the properties. This was a similar point to that made by the Deputy First Minister in the Assembly about 18 months earlier. The point was also made that NAMA had commenced, or would soon be faced with commencing, the escalation of payment demands under personal, corporate and cross-company guarantees. These would come from Northern Ireland borrowers, and this would mean an extraction of significant cash flows out of the local economy. It would mean cash coming out of trading companies, burdening them with additional debt at a time when they should be investing in economic recovery in Northern Ireland. Over the course of this period, I would have met with Frank and or Ian from time to time, mostly on the margins of other engagements or events. So rather than occupy my time, one or other or both met my special advisor, Richard Bullock, on a number of occasions to discuss these developments. The purpose of these contacts was to seek to ensure that whether with PIMCO, Cerberus or any other bidder, we would have the best possible assurance as to how any purchaser would operate here. Indeed, the efforts made to ensure protection for the Northern Ireland interests could be considered to run contrary to the interests of any potential purchaser. It was in this setting that the proposal from PIMCO of an MOU, should they be successful in acquiring the portfolio, was received. Any Northern Ireland politician who cared about the local economy would have welcomed such a deal. Here was a company promising to work with debtors and assist in developing out their frozen assets. They committed that they would not cash in personal or cross-company guarantees, and they undertook to utilise local labour. Moreover, though you wouldn't think it given some comments that have been made, the MOU was to cover every single debtor, not a so-called privileged few. It is hardly surprising that the Finance Minister and I favoured such a proposition, nor should it surprise anyone that later the Deputy First Minister and I would seek to have similar commitments from any other bidder for the portfolio. This whole process was by its very nature a confidential one. The companies involved did not want publicity before a deal would be concluded, and initially we were reluctant to unsettle the local market by suggesting that the entire portfolio was up for sale. However, in my press statement released as soon as the deal was announced, I indicated that we would shortly be meeting with the Cerberus team to discuss the way forward. That was a meeting that took place on the 10th of April. The Deputy First Minister also welcomed the deal on behalf of the executive ministers in the Northern Ireland Assembly. It hardly needs to be said that I did not have or share lead responsibility for these matters, and those in our executive who did had no decision-making power. The running of any competition was entirely undertaken by NAMA in accordance with its legislative duties. At no stage did I witness NAMA depart from its fiduciary responsibilities. It's fair to say that we had a different primary focus than NAMA, in that we wanted what was best for Northern Ireland. It was our aim and duty to protect the interests of those who are the engines of the Northern Ireland economy. Bluntly, it was not our responsibility to either maximise the value for the Republic's taxpayer, nor for that matter, the profitability of the deal for the company that purchased the assets. NAMA, on the other hand, was charged with getting the best deal for the Republic's taxpayers. And in doing so, they rejected both the request for a single bidder process and the suggestion that conditions should be applied to other bidders to govern their conduct in the disposal of the portfolio. Let me be clear. I am unashamedly and unapologetically pro-business. It is our business community that creates wealth in our society. They create the jobs and their activity grows our economy. Finally, Mr. Chairman, during a previous public session, an outrageous and groundless accusation was made. Naturally, not one shred of evidence was produced to support it. For the record, I repeat, I neither received, expected to receive, sought, nor was I offered a single penny as a result of the NAMA sale. I am offended by the allegation, but given its source, hardly surprised. Any and all efforts that I made were motivated by what was in the best interests of our economy. It would have been a dereliction of my duty not to seek to protect the position of Northern Ireland. Doing this is all that I have ever sought to do. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, First Minister, for your statement. I want to start, if I can, at the...
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Does Mr. Robinson have our timeline? And is it possible you get that? We have a lengthy timeline here. Mr. Robinson, he's just added some fairly interesting meetings that aren't in it. Is it possible that as we're talking, I mean, I'll come back to it later on.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, First Minister. If we could start with the meeting in May 2013, right at the start of your connection to these matters, as far as we can see from the papers in front of us. You have stated that it was either or both Frank Cushnahan and Ian Coulter that set up that meeting with PIMCO. At that time, did you have any concerns about Frank Cushnahan being involved in setting up that meeting, given that he was a member of the NAMA Advisory Committee and there may have been a conflict of interest?
Well, I'm not sure that there was a conflict of interest. I think the chairman of NAMA has already indicated that no confidential information was available to the Advisory Committee. I think you need to recognise that we saw the Advisory Committee as being on the Northern Ireland side of this issue, looking after the interests of Northern Ireland as opposed to looking after the interests of NAMA. Clearly, if we'd been successful in having a board member, it would have been a very different fiduciary responsibility that they would have had. So from that point of view, I didn't see any conflict of interest, though I have to say, quite frankly, it never entered my mind at the time. It wasn't something that we considered.
At this point in time, do you now see it as a conflict of interest in terms of Frank Cushnahan's presence at that meeting?
Well, not if the NAMA chairman is accurate in that there was no confidential information ever made available to the Northern Ireland Advisory Committee, nor indeed would he have been able to provide any information that wouldn't otherwise have been available to the competing interests through the data room that NAMA set up.
In the letter, PIMCO were clearly under the impression, and they state so clearly, that they were to meet with the executive or representatives of the executive, and I think it actually states that it was explained to them that the NI executive wanted to meet with PIMCO Was that ever the case?
We were certainly willing to meet PIMCO. I don't think we ever asked to meet PIMCO. It might be worthwhile just...
Was that an executive position?
I don't think the executive took any decision on the matter. I don't think the executive would have been aware of the matter, nor would it be normal for them to be so.
Okay. Do you have any awareness of why PIMCO would have came to that conclusion?
Well, presumably that was the way it was presented to them.
Okay, so it was presented wrongly to them?
Well, the executive would not have been aware, nor did I or anybody else request the meeting. We might have expressed an interest or a willingness to have such a meeting, but we never requested it.
So, in terms of how the meeting was presented to you, was it presented that PIMCO was wishing to meet with yourself and Sammy Wilson, and not the way that PIMCO have outlined it, that the executive wished to meet with them?
That's the way it was presented to us.
And in terms of the other firms that were met, PIMCO have said that there were other firms that met with the executive, quote unquote. Did you meet with any other firms in a similar vein?
Well, I think PIMCO is using the word executive probably to refer to ministers as opposed to the executive wouldn't meet firms at all, never have. They don't collectively meet to talk to companies. Martin, in his statement to the Assembly, indicated that there was interest from equity funds, etc., in the portfolio, and he urged the NAMA to take this matter seriously. I think that refers to the fact that from that time, which was 18 months before the deal was done, that there were interests from large institutional investors. So, yes, there would have been other interests. In case your next question is who were they, I haven't a clue. I would need to research that.
But in terms of your own position, the only firms that you met in regard to the NAMA portfolio were Cerberus and PIMCO?
I met both PIMCO and Cerberus. I may well have met with others, but before it ever became at the stage where NAMA had set up a structure to deal with the sale.
You don't know who the others may have been?
I'm sure I could think of one off the top of my head, but I would like to confirm it before I would hand over the information.
Okay, when could you confirm that for us?
I could do that today.
Okay. In terms of this PIMCO meeting, who else was at the meeting? Were there any officials, any special advisors?
There was a team came with PIMCO. I am pretty sure that Sammy Wilson and my advisor would have been present. In all of these matters, just in case anybody's looking towards this side of the table, we break down the responsibilities that we have in OFM, DFM between or among advisors. The one that deals with financial and economic matters is Richard Bullock.
Okay. Were there no DFP officials at the meeting, given that?
I don't think so.
But Sammy Wilson was there in capacity as a finance minister?
Yes.
Does that strike you as unusual at all? There were no officials with Mr. Wilson?
Not particularly. We have hundreds of meetings. I think you would need to know something of the way these kind of things are structured, particularly in our present circumstances, and particularly, I think, when you recognise the number of departments that we have.
You stated that Richard Bullock was at that meeting. Presumably then he would have taken notes or minutes, and can those be provided to the committee? I
have not seen them.
You haven't seen?
I haven't seen any minutes of the meeting.
Okay, are there minutes of the meeting?
I'm not sure.
Should there have been minutes of the meeting?
Not really. We meet companies, ambassadors, other individuals all the time in an introductory meeting. It's very much a meet and greet session where people present their credentials, they outline what, in this case, what the company's position is, where they are based, how many branches they have across the world, what their interests are. We encourage people to invest in Northern Ireland. It's very much a meet and greet meeting. As soon as you get to the stage where you're actually discussing detailed matters, then that would be a different matter indeed.
Would it be fair to say that the meeting was an unsolicited approach to PIMCO?
I wouldn't know. I would have no knowledge of how they were approached. They weren't approached by the executive.
They were approached by Mr. Cushnan and Mr. Coulter.
That is the assumption that I could make, but I have no direct evidence.
But surely you would have known who set up the meeting and who approached
Who
them.
set up the meeting, I do know. Who solicited the meeting, I cannot give direct evidence on.
Okay.
I can make the assumption as you will.
Are you concerned with the picture that has been painted by PIMCO in their letter that we received yesterday?
I haven't read the letter that you received yesterday, but I have seen press reports of the letter. And I think that indicates how they were approached about the issue.
They state in the letter they understood that PIMCO had been asked to attend this meeting so that an assessment could be made as to PIMCO's credibility and suitability as a potential purchaser and manager of assets located in NI. It was their understanding that PIMCO was not the only firm invited to meet with representatives of the executive at that time. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, I would have no idea how the meeting was portrayed to them. I only know that we were asked to meet with the company who was expressing an interest in the portfolio, and that we did so. The meeting was a perfectly normal, regular meeting, carried out in a friendly and positive manner.
So as far as you were concerned, it was a meet and greet?
It was a meet and greet. It was also an opportunity from our point of view to show that Northern Ireland was a good place to invest in.
When did you inform the NCA or the police about this meeting?
About this meeting? We have indicated to the NCA that we're willing to come and talk to them. They are not yet ready for that.
Should this not have been flagged up with the NCA before now?
PIMCO meeting?
Yes.
Why?
Because of a number of parties that are at the heart, and I need to be conscious about the investigation. But given the parties involved in the meeting and the allegations that have been levelled, it would have been entirely relevant, and I think it is entirely relevant to their investigation.
That's why we have indicated that we're willing to meet them.
And when did you indicate that?
Through my solicitor, and I couldn't give you the date. But I've said publicly, I mean, this isn't something new. I've indicated publicly that I would want to work with the PSNI or the NCA.
When did you indicate through your solicitor?
Within the last week, I would have thought, or so.
Should that not have been done sooner?
Well, we've been compiling within the department and within the private office all of the documentation. I think that we don't want to give it in stages. We want to hand over all of the information that we have to the NCA.
Okay. That would be useful, but I think, given that this has been rumbling on since July, that July should have been the time to inform the NCA about this.
That's your view. The view that we take is that we compile all of the information and hand it over.
In turn, I mean, obviously over the summer of 2013, there was a change in the position of the Minister of Finance and Personnel. In terms of this particular meeting in May, when was Simon Hamilton informed of the meeting in May between PIMCO and yourselves, or was he aware at the time?
I was not the one that spoke to him about the meeting. If anyone did, I assume he found out either from the former Finance Minister or from within his department.
And since that meeting in May, have you met with Mr. Cushnan in any capacity?
No, I didn't think it appropriate to do so, though I did send him a text message when I heard he was in hospital.
Okay. When did you become aware that he resigned from the advisory committee?
Presumably at the time.
Okay. And when did you become aware that he was working on the PIMCO deal after leaving?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
When did you become aware that he started working on the PIMCO deal after leaving the advisory committee?
I think the first knowledge that I probably had was when there was a request for a meeting.
And when was that?
Presumably just before the meeting was set up. These are issues that took place years ago, and I don't want to fall into the same trap that the Deputy First Minister fell into by categorically stating facts and then finding out later that my own recollection is unsound. It might be worthwhile just to indicate how a private office operates. As soon as one becomes a minister, and I hope you all have that experience at some stage in your lives, you give up the independence that you have as a member. You no longer make the arrangements for your meetings. You no longer write your letters. You no longer write your speeches. All of that is done for you. You go to meetings. You get a letter and amend it if necessary, and the same with the speeches if you want to use the official speech. So all I do is go to meetings. How they are set up and when, those details, you would have to ask the people who did it.
I think this is a key issue at this point, because if you were made aware that Mr. Cushnahan was working for PIMCO after he left the advisory committee, and if you then became aware that he was working on the Cerberus deal, then would it not have been the correct thing to do to bring that to the attention of the authorities?
Well,
because of the conflict of interest?
The conjecture is only valid if I had a recollection of it.
So you have no recollection?
I wouldn't have been involved in setting up any meeting. I would be involved in going to the meetings.
Okay, so it's a matter that we should raise with your officials?
In most of these cases, the arrangements would have been made through my special advisor.
Okay. Jim?
First Minister, this issue has obviously caused a lot of controversy. Do you recall it being controversial at the time?
But it wasn't controversial at the time. It wasn't even controversial after the sale had gone through. It was something where, on all occasions, the executive were at one. For North-South meetings, we would have received a briefing paper giving lines to take at the North-South meeting with Irish ministers. It wouldn't have mattered whether Martin was leading or whether I was leading at that meeting. We would have used the lines that were available to us. There was no conflict on any of these matters. There was a general relief when the portfolio was moving, because that meant that there was a real chance of the property market starting to improve and recover.
Yeah, and just following on to that, why did you feel that getting an institutional investor to replace NAMA was in the best interests of the Northern Ireland economy?
Well, it certainly was a better interest for the Northern Ireland economy. I suppose you would really have to go back to the setting up of the organisation itself. And, well, at a certain level I can understand why the decisions were taken in relation to, I think it's section 172 of the NAMA bill. But by far, in my view, the best way... This is the inability to buy, the person who's sold it to buy back. That's right. Yeah. Except if they pay the amount that they had in the first place borrowed. That meant that the people who had the strongest connection to any particular development site or property were really unable to get finance to be able to buy it back. And indeed, other people would have been able to buy it back for less than they were prepared to offer on occasion. So that was a difficulty, not the fault of NAMA. It was the legislation. One can see why it was inserted in the legislation. So by far the best way from a Northern Ireland point of view would have been that whoever could offer the most for a single property or asset would have been able to buy it. And in most of those cases, I think it would have been the original debtor. Short of that, I suppose if it had been in smaller chunks, so that it could have been purchased by some Northern Ireland investor, would have kept a lot of money in Northern Ireland. The next option was obviously the institutional purchaser, providing that institutional purchaser was going to have a structured disposal of the assets rather than simply going for the low-lying fruit and having what was effectively called a fire sale.
There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of speculation about the appointments to the Northern Ireland Advisory Committee of NAMA. What was your level of knowledge and involvement in that process?
Well, the appointments, I think, ultimately were made by NAMA. I believe that the Finance Minister was asked to put forward names for consideration. He did that. The Deputy First Minister has indicated that he was not aware or asked for to make any comment on that. I have no recollection that I was either, so I think we were at one on that. Though both of us were aware of the three names put forward, they are in a briefing document that we both received. The Deputy First Minister indicated during his evidence that there was nothing controversial about the names that were appointed, and indeed he welcomed them. So did I.
And could you have done anything to influence that decision?
With the Finance Minister?
Yeah.
Well, the Finance Minister didn't actually have a decision.
Yeah.
All he had was the opportunity to put some names forward, and as it appears, he wasn't the only one that was putting names forward, though I'm not quite sure who else was. But that would be a fairly normal process within government. Of course, if he had to make the appointments, then there might have been a very different process that he would have had to have gone through. But while we saw that as second prize in many ways, having an advisory committee, we still continued, both the Finance Minister, the Deputy First Minister and I continued to press that matter with the Irish Government, that we would have a dedicated member on the board.
In your evidence, you pointed out various reasons why you felt that there was a slight divergence between what you perceived to be the facts and the Deputy First Minister's recollection of events. There was another meeting when the Deputy First Minister met and greeted the successful bidders, and indeed there was a photograph was issued. Do you recall that?
I recall the Deputy First Minister is very quick to get the phone out and take photographs. He's a great tweeter. So there was nothing unusual with him taking a photograph at the meeting and putting it out.
But do you not find it surprising that the Deputy First Minister, having given evidence basically that he was kept largely in the dark about the whole process, and alleging that various phone calls, meetings, documents, he never received them, and indeed he said he never received the document which was referred to Special Advisor Darrell Hagan. Do you think it's a bit surprising then that he didn't ask the obvious question at that meeting, is why am I here and why is this all happening, given the fact I've been kept in the dark? Why was he meeting and greeting an organisation that he believes had very little involvement in their successful bid?
Well, I think in my evidence I've set out the knowledge that he had. Of course it is the case that because of the departments that were involved, there was a greater activity and involvement from DUP ministers because of the fact that this was largely going through the Department of Finance, who had lead responsibility on banking matters. The issue isn't whether he knew or was as involved as other people. The issue is whether he had been kept up to speed. I think I've shown that he was being kept up to speed. The reason why I have been slow in my comments to point any finger towards the Deputy First Minister is that, quite frankly, I didn't get the impression that the Deputy First Minister was trying to mislead this committee. I think he genuinely did not have any recollection of these events. I think he would probably again need to know something of the role that he and I have. We get flooded with stuff from all of the departments. So there are hundreds of things swirling around OFM, DFM at any one time. This was some years ago. It wasn't, as has been indicated, controversial at the time. I suspect he did not attempt to look to contemporaneous notes from the time. I have had the advantage of doing that. And quite honestly, I think if I'd come before the committee without having done the work that I have, there would be a lot more gaps than will appear because of the passage of time.
How do you feel NAMA have conducted themselves since the Northern Ireland portfolio was acquired by Cerberus?
Well, I suppose NAMA were always going to be in a hiding to nothing. Any rule that determines whether they carry out a sale, and I was just talking about the Northern Ireland portfolio more generally in terms of their work, were rests largely on their judgment of whether this is worth doing this deal, whether it's in the interests of the Irish taxpayers or not. Because it is a matter for judgment, they're always going to be second-guessed by somebody who thinks that they know better. So they were always going to be in a difficult position in the decisions that they took. I didn't have much interaction with NAMA. There was a meeting that Martin and I had with representatives of NAMA and the advisory committee. I think that was back in 2011 or 12. You would have bumped into a NAMA official or two, whether it was Frank Daly or someone else, at a professional dinner or something of that kind. In every contact that I had had with NAMA, they seemed like a thoroughly professional outfit who knew what they were doing.
Thank you.
Michaela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, First Minister.
Good morning.
You're welcome. And hope you're keeping well.
Still ticking.
Good. First Minister, kind of want to move things on a wee bit. Are you aware that Gareth Robison worked on the Millmount deal in any capacity and his role as a lobbyist?
I don't believe that he did, but again, I can't give direct knowledge of that.
So you wouldn't be aware if Gareth Robison had any dealings with the DUP around the Millmount site at the time?
I have no knowledge of it, nor any reason to believe that he did. It may come as a shock, particularly to the Irish news, but I've never been in his business premises. I've never seen his client list except in the Irish news. And it's not a subject that it would be appropriate for me to deal with.
The meeting of the 27th of September that you alluded to earlier, was there any minutes of that meeting?
So the 27th of September was which meeting?
Yeah, at 13. Yeah, where
with whom?
With Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Noonan.
Oh yes. I'm sure. I think there was a meeting taken by the Republic's authorities. And again, this was a meeting, as far as I can recall, the Minister was coming up for an engagement at lunchtime, called in to see us on the way. I think we'd... I'm not sure whether we'd asked for the meeting or not. Again, I would have to go back and look at the records. It is a distant memory. The meeting took place. We talked about a range of issues relating to the economy and NAMA in particular. The Deputy First Minister had been unable to get to the meeting, and we briefed him after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And just, Chair, could we clarify if there is minutes of that meeting? Just one last thing, First Minister. Cerberus also informed the committee that the Deputy Leader of the DUP, Mr. Nigel Dodds, was in contact, the Cerberus was in contact with Nigel Dodds. Do you know anything about that contact, as we don't have any information in regards to that, but Cerberus did inform the committee that they were...
My knowledge is that that was simply a social occasion that he was present at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First Minister, thank you.
Ciara, just a couple of points on the Michael Noonan meeting. The documentation we got from the Department of Finance in Dublin, we received no minutes of that meeting. There was a reference to it in a Dáil question, but no minutes. I think there should have been minutes held for a meeting of that magnitude between both finance ministers and yourself. And again, First Minister, your memory not for the first time has been rather vague on a number of issues. But do you recall asking for a copy of the DFP minister's briefing ahead of that meeting with Michael Noonan?
I don't recall asking for it, but the records show that I got a copy of it.
Why would you have needed that?
Presumably to discover where the meetings between Michael Noonan and Sammy Wilson, or would have been Sammy Wilson, I think, at that time.
Simon
Hamilton. What stage they were at in their discussions.
And was PIMCO discussed at that meeting?
I don't know whether PIMCO as such, the discussion may well have dealt with the issue of whether it was possible to do for NAMA to come to terms with a single bidder. Because I think at that stage we would probably have known of the PIMCO MOU, which was very attractive from a Northern Ireland point of view, and if it was going to be an open competition, we had more than one reason to be against an open competition. Obviously, if it was an open competition, you wouldn't have had the same, if you like, conditions applied that PIMCO were offering. But if it was an open competition, depending on how open it was, any fly-by-night company could have come in and simply dispose of the assets in a way that would have amounted to a fire sale.
At that point of time, was Michael Noonan aware of the PIMCO bid or the potential for a bid from PIMCO?
I'd be pretty sure that he would have had some brief before he met us on the issue and would have been aware of an interest, whether he knew it was PIMCO or not. And I think he would have been aware of the NAMA situation, because I think during the meeting he was making it fairly clear that from their point of view there were real difficulties in having an arrangement with a single bidder, that they needed to demonstrate that they were getting best value for the taxpayer, and that really could only be coming through a competition.
Was Millmount raised at that meeting?
No recollection of it being mentioned at all. If it was, it might have been welcomed by the Finance Minister, of the fact that NAMA were trying to help by developing out some sites. But that would have been the height of it.
Okay. So you have some recollection of the meeting, but no recollection of the Millmount issue at the meeting?
No recollection. I don't believe that it was raised, but if it was, that would have been the only context in which it was raised.
Okay. Just to clear this issue around Millmount up, did you have any significant interest in Millmount yourself, or was it more the Finance Minister, or both Finance Ministers? Because it certainly appears to the committee it was a major issue for any meetings that the Finance Ministers had with Michael Noonan.
I had no interest or involvement in the Millmount issue by NAMA. I have again a vague recollection that many years before that, with a previous owner, that I was invited to go along and to open some show house in Millmount, but that was not with the owners of the site at that stage. I had no involvement at all with Millmount, though I do welcome the fact that NAMA were willing to invest money to develop out the site.
Given your memory problems,
I don't have a memory problem. Now, what were you doing on the 27th of September 2013?
Let me come to the point. Given that you cannot recall what took place at these meetings, do you not agree that minutes should be taken of all meetings between senior ministers, particularly ministers from the Dáil, concerning issues such as NAMA, because this is the biggest property transaction that we've seen. And here were you as First Minister and the Finance Minister in the North discussing matters with Michael Noonan in a very important meeting, and there's not one single note. And here we are today struggling, and you're struggling to give us details for whatever reason. You say it's because of your memory, but it is not helpful to this inquiry in that regard. Do you not agree that for these kind of meetings in the future, minutes and notes should be taken?
I think if we had known that there was going to be an inquiry and interest about this matter, we would have probably recorded the meetings. The culture, I think, has been that there are certain types of meetings, the sort of meet and greet meetings that you don't take minutes at. That, as I understand from my own private secretary, is being reviewed, and at least a note of attendees and a paragraph or two to indicate what is discussed during the course of the meeting, I think, is now the pattern.
Ian?
Sorry, Chairman, can I make a suggestion that perhaps we write to the Office of First and Deputy First Minister to clarify if there was, for example, a PPS or another member of staff to attend that meeting, and if in fact there is a minute of that meeting. I think the witness has indicated that he doesn't have a recollection if there's a minute, and you've indicated that you feel that there should have been a minute. We don't know if there is a minute, so my suggestion would be that we do write to the department.
This is part of the problem to which we referred to earlier. We wrote to the head of the Civil Service, who had indicated a trawl was done over the summer, and the head of the Civil Service has said that for whatever reason he can't give us the documentation ahead of this meeting today, so we need to see that urgently.
So my suggestion is, rather than we talk extensively about whether or not there is a minute, let's clarify specifically on that issue. If there is a minute, and if there is one, can that be provided actually to clear up some of these issues?
Ian?
Yeah, I suppose the date that I can remember going back is the 26th of January 2006, when my last son was born. But if you ask me to clarify any dates after that,
wedding anniversary,
sort of snickered. My wife probably has often enough reminded me of our wedding anniversary, so I'm not sure that it's memory issues that's the case. But I think that whenever the Deputy First Minister was here, he, in respect of the Memorandum of Understanding, I think his words were it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because it hadn't been shared with him, although we have since found out that it had been. Do you believe that it is or was improper that a Memorandum of Understanding with any potential buyer of the Northern Ireland portfolio, was right or wrong?
Well, I think well, maybe I'll take each of those issues as they come along. First of all, in relation to memory, I think there are very few people who can remember in any great detail what they were doing a couple of years ago, and particularly on an issue where everybody seemed to be rowing in the same direction. In relation to the MOU, the Deputy First Minister is right in saying that it really doesn't have any standing unless it would be passed by the Executive. Of course, it would only come to the Executive if the Finance Minister brought it there on the foot of there being a successful outcome to the people that had offered the MOU. So clearly it was never actioned, if you like, because PIMCO withdrew from the project, and therefore the MOU died with them. As far as having an MOU is concerned, my recollection is that because they didn't know we had tried to get a Memorandum of Understanding, we got criticised by the House of Commons Northern Ireland Affairs Committee for not trying to get an MOU. So I think anybody looking, in this case from London but from anywhere else, would wonder why we weren't trying to get the maximum protection for Northern Ireland in these circumstances, given the size of the portfolio. Was the MOU a good one? Yes, it was. It was referred, I think, by Frank Daly as a debtor's charter, as if that was a bad thing from a Northern Ireland perspective. I can understand from a NAMA point of view to have the issue of an MOU, a requirement from other bidders, would have reduced the price and therefore wouldn't have been satisfactory from their point of view. I can also understand how, from a south of the border point of view, there might have been some very real concerns with Northern Ireland debtors getting, if you like, a better deal than debtors in the Republic. So I think there are a number of reasons why NAMA would not have been keen to have an MOU as part of any process that they were involved in, though I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't have stopped us if we had been able to arrange an MOU with a successful bidder.
It's not something, a memorandum of understanding isn't a new thing as far as trying to set things up. It's obviously something that is beneficial in circumstances like this.
I don't think anybody could say that an MOU would be a bad thing. If somebody is coming in with over £1 billion worth of assets to dispose of, it is in the interest of the local community to ensure that those assets are disposed of in an orderly way, and a way that would best interest our economy in Northern Ireland. I've already indicated that we had assets tied up with the Presbyterian Mutual Society. The administrator was waiting for the right time to put them onto the market. Banks had very considerable toxic assets that they were wanting to dispose of and waiting for the right time to do it. We had a number of discussions in the executive about the surplus assets that we had to dispose of, and whether it was right to put them onto the market or wait until a better day came along. So we all had an interest in ensuring that the disposals would be done in an orderly way so that the prices of land and property wouldn't crash, and that from an executive point of view, that we could maximise the amount of money that we would get for our own assets.
In respect of the letter that was sent to NAMA on the 17th of January 2014, do you know whether the Deputy First Minister saw or approved that letter?
This is the email that was sent following the conference call, is that right? Yeah. We'd been sitting through a conversation with the Finance Minister in the South and his officials. The subject matter and the nature and interest that we had in that call was to see if the kind of conditions that PIMCO had been willing to offer in their MOU could be applied to other bidders. Now, both Martin and I might have thought that this was a high reach for us to get that, but it didn't stop us from asking. We're well able, even in present circumstances, to make asks that we can't always be confident that we're going to succeed in getting. So that was the subject matter of the meeting. As we were asked during the course of the discussion to forward it on, we forwarded it on. To suggest that he wasn't aware of it, I think, just an example of frailty of memory rather than anything else.
Okay, and finally, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, do you believe that this deal has represented a good deal for Northern Ireland?
Yeah, there will be people who have to deal with Cerberus who will have found them to be a tough company to deal with. That's the nature of these kind of arrangements. They don't get to the size that they are by throwing their money around. So they're going to be tough negotiators, and I think depending on the extent to which debtors have been willing to work with them, the responses have been different. They have disposed of a considerable number of portfolios. We're starting to see activity on the skylines again in Northern Ireland. That's a good thing. Overall, it was the right thing to do, to have an orderly disposal of assets rather than either the fire sale or them being frozen and no activity and development taking place.
Okay, Dominic.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, First Minister. Just to go back to the extent to which the Deputy First Minister was kept informed of the various developments in these matters. When he was before the committee, I didn't suggest that the wool was being pulled over his eyes, but I think
it came fairly close.
I think I did use the phrase that he was being kept in the dark. You obviously, in the information that you have provided here, refute that. I get the impression that the main interest in these issues was coming from, let's say, your side of the department. Was the Deputy First Minister a little bit disinterested in all of this?
No, I mean, I think it's unfair to suggest, as some would, that he was in some way a passenger or an observer in these matters. He had already made statements publicly indicating that he was looking for an equity partner to dispose of the assets and take them from NAMA, and that he thought that was a good thing. That's on the Assembly record. So I don't think that there was no difference between the Deputy First Minister and I, or indeed with any other ministers, during the whole of this process. There was never anybody who said, look, hold on a second. I know nothing about this. I don't like what's going on. That just didn't happen. The process went ahead. The Deputy First Minister was informed. It's not a matter of whether you believe Martin's account or mine. I'm providing you with the evidence that indicates that the MOUs were sent. I think it's unfair of the Deputy First, unfair to the Deputy First Minister, for people to suggest that somehow his special advisors were in charge of the department and they would spoon feed him and give him information or not give him information as they would choose. That isn't the Martin McGuinness that I know, I have to say. So he was aware of what was going on. I simply do put it down to the frailty of memory. And I know from my own position that I find it hard. Memory is a strange thing. And it is often something is needed to jog a recollection of an event. I have had that to some extent by being able to look at some of the contemporaneous information. But I think that it's very clear from what I've already said and shown and proven that he was being kept up to date. But you are right in saying, and I've never resiled from the fact that when it comes to matters relating to education or agriculture or the arts and leisure, the Deputy First Minister will be more engaged and knowledgeable about those matters because those are departments that his colleagues hold. The issues around finance, the economy and investment are within the departments that my colleagues hold. So yes, we would be more involved and more active in it. The issue wasn't whether we were more involved and active. The issue is whether we were keeping him in the dark or not, and I think we've shown that we weren't.
So, from what you've said, was the Deputy First Minister who appeared before this committee a different Deputy First Minister to the one that you knew? Because he did tell the committee that he vested the authority in his special advisors to decide what information should be given to him and what information shouldn't be, and that in the case of the particular email which was at issue, that he wasn't surprised that Darragh O'Hagan had made a decision not to share it with him because he had invested that trust in her.
Yes, which would be fine if it weren't for some other factors. First factor being that we'd had a meeting beforehand. The sending of the MOU was the product of a meeting. The MOU that was sent had a covering paper which said NAMA-Doc as discussed. So clearly there had been a discussion on it. And I think he can't say that he wasn't aware of the MOU, and not only was a second copy sent to another of his advisors, Vincent Parker, but it was also the subject of the conference call as well. Now, you can miss it once, You might even miss it twice, but to miss it 3 times I think would be unusual.
So you're flatly refuting the version given by the Deputy First Minister here?
I'm saying that he was wrong in his recollection of the events, and I've set the record straight with evidence that suggests that he would have been aware of that, though we may have forgotten.
Okay. The original anxiety around the NAMA Northern Ireland portfolio was in connection to a fire sale which might destroy the property market in Northern Ireland. And I think the preferred option of Minister Wilson at the time was that Northern Ireland would have a full member on the board of NAMA. I think the late Mr Lenihan, then Minister for Finance in the Republic, didn't think that it was possible for Northern Ireland to have a full member on the board, but there was a committee, the advisory committee was set up, and 2 Northern Ireland external members of that committee were appointed and were operating. And according to the documents we have, they were to communicate directly with the Department of Finance and Personnel matters of interest with regard to the Northern Ireland portfolio. Were you aware of the operation of that channel, and did it reach as far as OFM, DFM?
Well, we all supported the proposition that there should be a Northern Ireland representative on the NAMA board. Indeed, the Deputy First Minister is on the public record in the Assembly indicating that we were pushing the Taoiseach to have such representation. And there was nothing from any of the other parties that was contradicting what he was saying and saying, no, that would be a bad idea. Everybody was pushing in that same direction. I know all of the parties in the executive were pushing in that direction because it was the subject of North-South Ministerial Council meetings where our ministers were all present. And that was part of the Northern Ireland brief at the time, was to get a Northern Ireland representative, even after there had been representation given through the advisory committee. So that's something that Sammy Wilson and Simon Hamilton had in common with the rest of their colleagues. In relation to the reporting, it was a very regular item on the executive agenda that NAMA would be discussed, and the Finance Minister would have had the opportunity to update members of the executive on anything of interest that had happened in that connection. But I don't believe that there was any direct correspondence with the Deputy First Minister and myself about such meetings. There is an item on every executive agenda relating to the economy, and we put that on as soon as the recession hit us. It's still there, though it's now more recovery than recession. And during the course of that, it's open to any member of the executive to raise an issue about NAMA or anything else. And from time to time, our briefing notes would show that we're being briefed about an update on what the NAMA situation was.
Yeah. We know that Mr Cushnahan was one of the people proposed by Minister Wilson. The other representative, Mr Roundtree, we're not so sure of what the genesis of his proposal was, possibly the Irish government. Who would have been the main conduit to DFP from the advisory committee, Mr Cushnahan or Mr Rowntree?
I would have no direct knowledge of that. That seems to me to be a question more appropriately put to one of the finance ministers when you have the opportunity to speak to them.
Okay. I said earlier that there was a deal of anxiety about a fire sale, but that anxiety seems to have been dissipated by assurances received from Minister Lenihan that it was in no one's interest for a fire sale of Northern Ireland assets to take place. And in fact, Minister Wilson assured the Consumer Council in some of the correspondence that that was the case. So things, would I be right in saying that things then settled down and there was less, if any, anxiety about a fire sale after the advisory committee had been set up and the two external members appointed?
Well, the fear about a fire sale would come in two forms. One, as to whether NAMA was going to indulge in a fire sale, and that was put to rest very quickly. The government and NAMA very responsibly indicated that there would be no fire sale. We were assured repeatedly that that just wouldn't happen. However, there was always still the fear in the back of our minds that a fire sale was possible, because NAMA could have sold the portfolio to somebody who would then have had a fire sale. So it was never completely removed. The fact that years past, NAMA was set up, I think 2009, years past, there was no fire sale. The other end of that was that while there was no fire sale, there was next to no activity with the portfolio. It was effectively being frozen. That's why the two areas where NAMA had put some of its own resources into developing out and completing sites was welcome. But given the number of sites that were within the portfolio, they just couldn't have afforded to do that elsewhere. So we moved from the urgency of a NAMA fire sale to a situation where everything was stagnant and that it was becoming a factor that our construction industry was effectively moving to Great Britain in large parts to get business. And even to some extent that is still the case, because we haven't got full recovery. So we needed something to stimulate the local market. That's why I think we moved from the position in 2009, fear of a fire sale, to some responsible, orderly disposal being the way forward.
Okay, so that leads us up to the PIMCO meeting, and I think you suggested earlier on that that may have been instigated by Mr. Cushnahan and Mr. Coulter. Would you? I know you're an avid reader of the Irish News. Would you agree that Mr. Coulter and Mr. Cushnahan were acting in the role of what the Irish News might call fixers?
Well, when the Irish News use the term, it's supposed to be a bad thing, but being a fixer isn't necessarily a bad thing. To make things happen can be a good thing as well. So in this context, I think it's fairly clear that they wanted the disposal of the NAMA assets in a way that was helpful to the Northern Ireland economy. That's the way they introduced the issue to us. I've already indicated we weren't aware of any fee structure that was there in the background, but then, ministers aren't going to ask anybody that comes to them, what are you getting out of this? That's just not the way government responds to requests. I'm not sure that I would disagree with the term fixer. These were people who would be regarded as pillars of the establishment in many ways. You're talking about a former chairman of the CBI. You're talking about somebody who officials had recommended to direct rural ministers to carry out responsible positions within the general governance of OFM, DFM, who had been appointed to the harbour commissioners. So I don't think that there was anything in anybody's mind when these people spoke. They spoke with some authority and knowledge and expertise.
So it never crossed your mind that either or both of these two gentlemen, might have been working for to some extent, their own benefit insofar as they would get a fee out of whatever deal would be done?
Well, I never even considered that they were getting a fee out of what might be done. Just something that, quite frankly, I never thought of at the time. I did know that they would have had clients that they may well have been wanting to have a particular outcome for, but if you have clients who are in NAMA, you will want to ensure that the disposal is done in a way that is helpful. That would have been the height of what I would have assumed their interest was. I'm not sure that anybody comes to ministers and puts all their cards on the table about what their interests are. From my point of view, there are really only two questions that I have to ask myself about any such circumstances. One is this good for Northern Ireland? Is this the right thing to do? And the second, which I ask in connection to the fact that it is Ian and Frank, both of whom I have known for a very considerable period of time, would I be doing the same thing for you if you came along with the same request? And the answer would have been yes. It was in the Northern Ireland interest, and I thought it was the right thing to do.
But yet, it's the case that PIMCO has stated public that after they exercised what they called due diligence and discovered that one of these people would be claiming a fee for their work, that they backed off from the deal. That may well be the position. I'm not aware that that was precisely what they said. Certainly at the time, I remember we asked ourselves, and I think perhaps asked others, why PIMCO had backed out of the deal. An article appeared, if I can recall, I think it was either the Irish Times or the Financial Times, probably the Financial Times, giving some background to boardroom problems in PIMCO at that time. I assume perhaps wrongly as it now transpires at the time, that was one of the reasons that they had changed their position on this issue. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. They're referring to you as First Minister. Is that correct, or is Mr. Robinson more correct this morning?
You can call me Peter if you want. It doesn't really matter to me.
I'll call you First Minister.
I am still First Minister.
Okay, First Minister, of course. First Minister, we've had a useful discussion around the table of why we're here, but just in case you think we're wasting all our times, let's remind ourselves of why we're here, because rather than being a deal of the century, a wonderful deal, in fact, this is very clearly a corrupt deal. This has been a dirty scheme, and there are so many aspects of it which have people tearing their hair out. So, and I suppose there's three categories. There's a conflict of interest, perhaps the most egregious conflict of interest I have seen in public life, where Mr. Cushnan is serving on the ANI Advisory Committee for NAMA, but he's also hawking the assets of NAMA. He's inviting you to meetings, including one we heard about this morning or last night from PIMCO in May 2013. And he doesn't declare that because we have the minutes of the ANI Advisory Committee. So at no point does Mr. Cushnan put his hand up and say, by the way, while we're sitting here discussing these assets, I'm trying to sell them. And not only am I trying to sell them, but I've been doing meetings with some of the most powerful people in the land to try and do so. And that's where I think people get very concerned, First Minister, that that was never declared. And that, I think, smells wrong, reads wrong, and it was wrong. As well as that, of course, we have this overarching issue that there was over €5 billion in loans behind these properties, First Minister. And when that was reduced, when NAMA bought the portfolio, of course, it was much reduced, around €2 billion, and then sold for £1.24 billion. The rub, of course, is that in that difference, the difference is carried by the ordinary Joe and Josephine in the south of Ireland, and their taxes and their children and their children's children have to pay all that back. The debt was socialised, and of course, many of these speculators and developers are now back at work, doing well, while the ordinary people have to carry the burden of their wrongdoing in the time ahead. And therefore, if the sale was wrong, if the sale was compromised, First Minister, if NAMA didn't get the best price, and it's my speculation, Chair, that NAMA didn't get the best price because the deal was compromised, and therefore the taxpayer in the south is worse off and carrying a bigger burden than they should have to carry. And why is that important to us, First Minister? Because if you're a community group trying to buy a photocopier, you have to get 3 bids and you put them in and you get your money released. If you're an electrician who wants to fix the back stairs, lights here at Stormont, you have to bid like everybody else, and it's a fair process. And we have worked hard right around this table to make sure these are fair processes. So when the ordinary person in the street sees that when it comes to the biggest deal, property deal ever in this island, that in fact there's an inside circle, that certain people are able to make things happen.
Mr. Chairman, is this a question or a speech?
And when certain people see, that you can buy your way into influence, you can make things happen, then it makes a mockery of our business environment. And our business environment, First Minister, and particularly in bringing in foreign direct investment, is absolutely essential. So I'm just saying that because it's important background. That's why I think ordinary people are disgusted at what they see here, and that's why it's what I call a dirty scheme. So, but let's go back to the timeline, First Minister, because PIMCO told us last night there was a meeting in May 2013 which you were at, and you'll see this. Why I asked them to print out the timeline, it's a voluminous document, but doesn't mention that meeting. Very material, relevant meeting. And then you tell us today in April, during the visit around the Irish head of state to Windsor, that there was another meeting. So can you tell us a little bit about that meeting in April? Who was at that meeting? Was it the same players? Was it Mr. Cushnan? Was it Mr. Hamilton? Who was at the April meeting? Because we now know what happened at the May meeting.
Well, there's a number of matters in relation to the commentary. I just, by way of concern, would express the view that if the role of the committee is to establish facts, it probably is better that the members of the committee do not in advance decide what the outcome is going to be and then try and retrofit the evidence to what their conclusions have been. The conclusion may well end up in the place that Mr. Muilleoir says, but I think it doesn't encourage confidence in an open and fair process if there is already a conclusion reached that this is a corrupt deal or a dirty deal. The fact is that I believe that the deal, whatever the issues that have clouded the picture, the outcome was beneficial for the people of Northern Ireland. And I assume that the priority for the people on this committee is what is good for Northern Ireland. Of course, we want to see people in the south doing well and having the best deal that they can possibly get. Our priority has to be what our local interest is in it. In terms of the figures that were produced by Mr. Muilleoir, he is right in indicating that this covers debt of about £5 billion. However, the assets aren't worth £5 billion. That money has been lost up to the level of its present day value. And that, I think we can look to the bankers for rather than to NAMA or anybody else. As far as meetings are concerned, I've indicated that we were involved in meetings with PIMCO. It was no surprise to be told that there was a meeting with PIMCO. I have already put that on the public record beforehand. And there's no reason why I wouldn't put it on the public record beforehand. It was a meeting carried out in a perfectly professional way. It was a meet and greet meeting such as I've had 1,000 times. There was nothing done at the meeting that was untoward. There's nothing that I would have been unhappy for a full recording to have been taking place. Indeed, it might have helped us. So, from the point of view of PIMCO, all that there was ever between PIMCO and the executive was a mutual desire to see an orderly disposal of assets. In the event it didn't happen with PIMCO, I'm not going to look back on it now and say it might have been better if it had, because they were offering an MOU. At any rate, I think that there is nothing that we need to second guess ourselves with in terms of the contact with PIMCO.
Sorry, First Minister, the meeting in April 2014 with Cerberus during the visit to the Queen of England and Windsor and so on. Do you remember who was at that meeting? This is April 2014, which Mr. Wales mentioned 2 weeks ago, and that you recalled this morning.
Yes,
you said you can. I think a meeting.
This is the first Dan Quayle meeting, is it?
No. Well,
there were two meetings.
Sorry, I don't think so, First Minister. I only know of one meeting with Dan Quayle here, but unless it was a second meeting here, and I think we'd all be making the news about it.
The Dan Quayle meeting was on the 24th of March and again on the 24th of September.
Yes, and First Minister, during the visit, the visit of the President Higgins to England, to the Queen of England and Windsor and so on, I think you said you came back to Belfast for a meeting at that time, or did the meeting happen in London with Cerberus?
No, the meeting was in Belfast. Martin was to come back that morning, but we had a text message which indicated that he was going to have to go to a funeral and that we should brief him afterwards.
And just in fairness to us, we don't know about that. We have a long timeline there, but it's not there. Do you remember who was at that meeting? Was it Cerberus? Was it Minister Hamilton? Was it Frank Cushnan? Was it Ian Coulter? If you can't remember the full detail now, maybe you can come back with it. But
I'll try and come back with it. I'm pretty sure that in terms of Cerberus, Frank Cushnan was not involved. I'm pretty sure that Ian Coulter was involved. I'm pretty sure my special advisor was there, and I'm pretty sure the Finance Minister would have been there as well.
And you think it's fair enough of us to ask these questions, First Minister? I'm not trying to
it's fair for you to ask any question which is about my direct knowledge.
Okay.
As far as that goes.
But you see, we've been sitting here for 5 months, and over the last 24 hours we've heard 2 meetings which are very relevant to material which we didn't know about. So would you maybe give us a commitment you'll go through the timeline and any other meetings that are, not now of course, any other meetings that are material, instead of us having to poke around and get people writing this from New York telling us about them, would you perhaps give us a commitment, if you could, to come back and say here's another material meeting which isn't in the timelines?
Yeah, I think the set pieces in which I was involved would have been the meeting on the 27th of September with Mr. Noonan, the conference call on the 14th of January with Minister Noonan, the meeting with Dan Quayle and the Cerberus team on the 24th of March, the meeting that you've just referred to on the 10th of April with Cerberus, the meeting with Dan Quayle on the 24th of September. I have to say on the 2nd of September, I haven't referred to this because it doesn't really add much to it, but there was a meeting on the 2nd of September that I was involved in with Ronnie Kells, and that was simply to welcome him to his post. He had been appointed by Cerberus to be an interface in Northern Ireland for them.
Thank you, First Minister. Back to the meeting with PIMCO, the May 2013 meeting, and I know it's difficult for people to follow the timeline, but Mr. Cushnan was on the board of NAMA, the advisory group at that time, and you said, look, we believe maybe didn't have insider or detailed information, so it was appropriate for him to be there. But surely, since it's now emerged from PIMCO that he was in line to get a payment, a £5 million payment, then it does become inappropriate, because that's obviously you didn't know about that. Or certainly none of us knew about that until that came out, PIMCO revealed it. No one here. But does that not change the nature of that meeting? Because where Mr. Cushnan could say, and NAMA-Cerberus didn't know the inside details of the portfolio, and we can come to that later. But in fact, it changes the entire tenor of the meeting, does it not, First Minister, that Mr Cushnan is on the NI Advisory Board. He invites you, we presume, or we assume he invites you to a meeting with PIMCO, a potential buyer of the portfolio, and he doesn't say either to the NI Advisory Committee that he's involved in it, and he doesn't reveal he's in line of a £5 million payment. Surely that's classic conflict of interest, First Minister.
Well, what I've attempted to do was to set out the basis of my knowledge at the time the meeting was taking place. The issues that you invite me to address would require me to speculate, would require me to cross the line with the NCA inquiry, and I think it's probably inappropriate that I should do so.
But it's material to us, of course, because it's the first time we found evidence of Mr Cushnan at a meeting when he's on the NI Advisory Committee, and I have to say, First Minister, it's not a few dances, but it's as egregious a conflict of interest as I can imagine. And I suppose what we are saying here is that there are people in the room who are saying we're in the best interest of this jurisdiction. We're trying to do the best for everyone. But what isn't clear at the time is that they, according to PIMCO later, were both in line for a £5 million payment. So, I mean, do you view Frank Cushnan as loquacious, avuncular, many years of service, but do you view Frank Cushnan as an honourable man?
I think the general view of Frank Cushnan in that he was used very considerably as an expert in these areas. I was almost going to use the word guru in terms of banking and financial issues. I'm not in a position where I can indicate whether there was any conflict of interest, because I would need to know what his legal requirements were in the office that he held with NAMA as a member of the advisory committee. Those are matters that others are going to decide, and not me. And again, I'm not going to speculate on these matters. I think it's inappropriate. It does go across the line into the territory of the MCA. And I know that the committee has received legal advice and will not want to stray into those areas.
And I think that's fair enough as far as it goes, but it's very material to us because Mr Cushnan was appointed to the NI Advisory Committee. It seems to me that there has been that he's let us all down, to say the very least. That we have to be disappointed if someone is appointed by our government or advised, our government nominates someone, they then get on to an NI Advisory Board. At the same time, they're taking part in meetings while serving on that board and not declaring that to the board. So you have the absurd situation with NAMA coming to the October 2013 meeting in the offices of Tuans and telling Frank Cushnan, who's a member of the NI Advisory Board, that there's been a bid from PIMCO. And of course he knows that, First Minister, because he organised a meeting back in May with you and others with PIMCO. So there are really grave questions there. I know you described Ian Coulter and Frank as pillars of the establishment, but can we really still say that today, First Minister? Given what's on the record, and PIMCO have said there was a payment of $5 million in the works for both, and withdrew, had the decency to withdraw from the bidding process because of that. But I mean, do you feel disappointed in those two men, or do you want to comment on that at all?
I think I admire your tenacity in these matters. It's the third time that you've asked me the same question in a different way, and I suppose it'll be the third time that I will answer perhaps in the same way. You invite me to reach conclusions. I'm not investigating. I'm not on your inquiry. It's up to you to reach your conclusions. It's up to the NCA to reach their conclusions on these matters. I just think it is inappropriate for me to speculate on these matters. I have no responsibility to speculate on these matters, and I think it would be imprudent for me to do so.
I just finish, First Minister, just to look at the deal as it happened. The NAMA referred to this as competitive tension. That is, two parties left, Cerberus and Fortress. As we now know, Cerberus bid £100,000 over the £1.24 billion asking price, reserve price for the portfolio. Our friends in Fortress didn't even reach reserve price, so it was a home run for Cerberus. And you know, as I sat in Berlin Airport last night at 12 o'clock at night, wondering why I'm reading through 900 pages of papers.
You get around.
It comes back to me all the time.
Washington, Monday, Berlin, Wednesday.
What was Cerberus paying for? What was PIMCO paying for? And it seems to me, First Minister, the only thing you can pay for is information. Someone knew that you could bid £100,000 more for this portfolio and win it. And the only way you could know that is you had to know what Fortress are bidding. And that disturbs me, First Minister, and it brings me back to the role of Fortress in the entire bid. And you did mention earlier that you perhaps met one other group, but I presume you didn't meet Brendan McGinn of Fortress. I'm just ruling that out because you would remember that.
There were no meetings that I'm aware of with Fortress.
Mr. McGinn. Well, I think, Chair, that's something we're going to have to come back to because Mr. McGinn, who was the lead agent of Fortress in Ireland, his name's come up here before, was also an intimate business colleague of Frank Cushnan in 2008-2009 during the Emerald Fund bid, the failed Emerald Fund bid of the Controller of New York City to invest here. Both Mr. Cushnan and Mr. McGinn worked very closely together, and of course in this deal they ended up in separate sides. First Minister, look, just to finish, First Minister, I suppose, without stepping into NCA territory, but my colleague, Mr. Girvan, late of this parish, described this entire mess as a dirty scheme. Do you agree with that?
I think that's the role of this committee and the NCA inquiry. If someone is going to make a judgment, it is better to make that judgment after you've received all of the information, rather than having that as a judgment either at the beginning or through the process.
But how can someone who's getting £5 million
that's
be at a meeting with you and it not be a dirty scheme, and be at a meeting with PIMCO and he serves on the NI Advisory Committee on NAMA, First Minister? I mean, there are facts in the public domain. Of course, we all wait the conclusions.
And you are entitled to reach your view on what those facts add up to. What I am not entitled to do, not being involved in the inquiry, sitting outside and viewing bits and pieces that I might hear on the news, to reach conclusions without hearing the evidence. I don't know whether you've received information from Frank Cushnan and Ian Coulter. I think the early indications were that you hadn't. I'm not sure that you can reach conclusions without having information from Frank Cushnan and Ian Coulter. So I think I'm not going to go in half-cocked, if you like, on this matter. I will await the outcome. You have indicated a series of questions that need to be answered, but it is your job to get the answers, and all I can provide would be opinions and speculation, and I think I'm precluded from doing that in terms of the legal advice.
Well, you've been helpful. You've told us about meetings we didn't know about, and I suspect, First Minister, the NCA, the FBI, the PSNI, the Finance Committee of the South, maybe they'll all get conclusions before us, but thank you for